man in the window. It was a quiet Friday afternoon when my parents decided to leave for the weekend. My mom and dad had planned a getaway trip to a nearby town, and they trusted me enough to leave me alone in our suburban home. I was 16, and it was the first time I'd ever stayed home by myself for a weekend. My parents usually didn't go away, and when they did, they preferred to take me along, but this time was different. I didn't mind. I was more than happy to have a place to myself. Our house was a typical two-story suburban home. Nothing too fancy, but it was comfortable and cozy. The kind of place that seemed safe and predictable. The neighborhood was quiet, with well-maintained lawns and friendly neighbors who smiled and waved as they walked by. Nothing ever really happened around there. It was the kind of place where you could leave your doors unlocked, and no one would think twice. The kind of place where you'd never expect anything out of the ordinary. As the evening rolled in, I was settling into my routine. I grabbed some snacks from the kitchen, made myself a cup of hot chocolate, and sat down in the living room to binge-watch some Netflix. It was just me and the silence of the house, the usual hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint creak of the house settling, nothing that would make anyone think twice. I was completely relaxed, enjoying the peace of being home alone. However, as the hours passed, a strange feeling began to creep in. It was hard to explain. It wasn't fear exactly, just a sense of unease. A nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the quiet of the house, or the isolation of being alone in a place that always felt full of life. It wasn't uncommon for me to get jumpy in silence, especially when I was by myself. I tried to shake off the feeling. I distracted myself with the TV and a couple of video games, but every now and then, I would glance out the window, which was positioned above the kitchen sink, looking out into the backyard. The backyard was a decently sized space with a big oak tree at the far edge, several bushes, and a rickety old shed where my dad stored some old gardening tools. Nothing remarkable, the kind of backyard that made you think everything was normal. But that night, something felt off. It was around midnight when I noticed something strange. I had gotten up to grab another snack, and as I passed by the window, I saw a faint light flickering from the direction of the shed. It wasn't bright or flashing, just a soft glow, like someone had turned on a light inside. The shed hadn't been used in months. The light bulb inside was burned out, and I'd never seen anyone in there for ages. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I rubbed my eyes and stared at the window, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But no, there it was again. The light. It shouldn't have been on. The shed was old and falling apart, and no one had gone near it for a long time. It felt like my mind was playing tricks on me, but the longer I looked, the more real it seemed. My curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend, Sarah, asking if she was coming over. Maybe she had decided to drop by unannounced, but no reply. I then texted my parents, telling them I was fine and that I was watching a movie. They replied with their usual messages, nothing alarming. I stood there in front of the window for a few more moments, my mind racing with possibilities. I thought about checking it out, maybe someone had snuck into the shed. But it was too late, and the thought of going outside alone at night felt unsettling. Suddenly, I heard a noise from the backyard. A rustling, faint but distinct. It came from the direction of the shed. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Someone was definitely out there. I froze. A million thoughts ran through my head at once. Should I call the police? Should I go check it out? I felt like I couldn't move, my body paralyzed by the strange sense of dread that had taken over. After what seemed like an eternity, the rustling stopped. Silence fell again, broken only by the distant hum of traffic from the road. I waited a few moments, trying to collect my thoughts, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the back door. My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't heard anyone walking outside, but now the sound was clear. Someone was outside, walking on the gravel path leading up to the back door. The steps were slow, deliberate, heavy, like someone was trying to make their presence known. I quickly ducked down, crouching behind the couch. I grabbed my phone again, ready to dial 911. But before I could even press the numbers, I heard a soft knock on the door. "Hello?" A voice called out from the other side, deep and calm. It wasn't a voice I recognized. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to do. The knocking continued for a few more moments before it stopped, followed by a long silence. Then, something even stranger happened. The light in the shed suddenly went out. But not just the light, the entire backyard went pitch black. There was no moonlight, no streetlights filtering in. It was as though all the power in the yard had been cut off. I felt my stomach churn. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted. I wasn't alone. Someone was out there, and they knew I was here. I slowly crawled over to the window, hoping to get a glimpse of whoever was outside. But there was nothing. The backyard was empty. The shed was dark. No sign of anyone. But that wasn't the worst part. As I stood there, staring out into the void of the backyard, I saw something move. A figure, tall and shadowed, standing in the middle of the yard. I couldn't see much, just the outline of a person. He was standing completely still, facing the window. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. Was it my imagination? No. I saw him move again, just slightly. I ducked down, heart racing. Who was this person? What did they want? I grabbed my phone and called 911. The operator answered quickly, and I whispered into the phone, trying not to make a sound. Someone's in my backyard. I think they're watching me. Please send someone. The operator assured me help was on the way, but it felt like forever before the sound of sirens reached my ears. The figure in the backyard didn't move the entire time. When the police arrived, they checked the yard. There were no signs of forced entry or anything unusual. Just an empty backyard and a shed with no lights on. They said it was probably a prank, but I didn't feel convinced. Something didn't sit right with me. The figure I saw. It didn't feel like an ordinary person. The police left, and I locked up the house for the night, trying to forget everything that had happened. But I couldn't shake the image of the man standing in my backyard, staring through my window. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Every little noise made my heart race. Every shadow seemed like something more. It wasn't until the next morning, when my parents came home, that I felt some relief. But the feeling didn't go away. I kept thinking about that figure, the man in the window. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, that I had imagined it. But deep down, I knew something had been out there. Something, watching. It's been years now, and I've moved to a different town. I don't stay in that house anymore. But every now and then, when I'm alone, I still get that feeling. The feeling of being watched. And no matter where I go, I can't shake the memory of the man in the window. He said he was a demon. This is gonna sound weird, and honestly, even writing it out makes me feel uneasy. But it stuck with me for years. It happened back when I was in high school, in a quiet suburb outside Philly, Pennsylvania. There was this kid, let's call him Patrick. That wasn't his real name. His real name sounded like it belonged in a Shakespeare play, and I still don't feel comfortable saying it out loud. I'm not superstitious or anything, but once you hear what happened, you might understand. Patrick was off, like, in a way that made even adults uncomfortable. He was socially awkward to the extreme, never smiled, barely blinked, and he had this weird way of staring at people, like he was looking through you. He wore the same gray hoodie every single day, no matter the weather. I mean literally every day. Hood up, even in 90-degree heat. And he smelled like moldy clothes, like he hadn't washed that hoodie in months. He also wore these cheap, black sunglasses 24/7. Indoors, during class, at lunch, teachers stopped asking him to take them off because he just wouldn't. He'd sit silently, still, and when called on, he'd either ignore you or give some cryptic one-word answer. Now here's where things get weird. Patrick used to adopt people. Not like, legally, obviously. He'd just walk up to someone out of nowhere and say, "You're adopted now." That was it. No context. Just, "You're adopted." We all figured it meant you were safe from him or something. Like he was claiming you. Some kids thought it was funny. Most of us were just creeped out. He didn't do this often, maybe 3 or 4 people total. I was one of them. I think, looking back, maybe he had a crush on me. Or maybe he just decided I was one of the safe ones. Either way, he said it to me in the hallway one day, totally out of the blue. I just kind of nodded and walked away. Another girl, Gabby, was adopted too. She and I used to be close, Patrick was way more obvious about liking her. He'd stare at her constantly. Once, he gave her a drawing of a goat with horns and her name carved into its side. She threw it out. But I saw it before she did. It looked too detailed, too real. One afternoon, a bunch of us, me, Gabby, Laura, and Luke, were hanging out behind the school in this little wooded area. There were old sheds back there, kind of like bunkers. It was our unofficial hangout spot. We were just chilling, talking trash about school, when somehow the conversation turned to Patrick. We started laughing about how weird he was, calling him that ridiculous nickname we'd come up with for him, so we didn't have to say his real name. But Laura slipped up. She said his real name. Not once, but 3 times. And I swear to God, on the 3rd time, he appeared. Patrick climbed up onto the shed roof from the back, holding a freaking baseball bat. No sound, no warning, just there, standing above us, watching. The look on his face wasn't angry. It was blank, empty, like he wasn't even really there. None of us said a word. Gabby's mouth just dropped open. I waved awkwardly, and he nodded only at me, then hopped down and disappeared back into the woods. We all freaked out for a minute, then tried to laugh it off. What the hell was that? How long was he watching us? That kind of thing. But something felt off. I didn't say it out loud, but in my gut, I felt like we'd messed up. Like we'd said something we shouldn't have. Weeks went by, and nothing happened. We all tried to forget about it. Then came the second incident, the one that still keeps me up sometimes. I was at Laura's house, just hanging out in her room. Her parents were home, so we weren't doing anything crazy. Just chatting, scrolling on our phones, whatever. And again, Patrick came up in conversation. This time, we only said his name twice. 10 minutes later, we heard the front door slam. At first, we thought one of Laura's friends had just shown up. People came and went all the time at her place. Her parents were super chill. But when we got downstairs, her mom was at the front door talking to someone. It was Patrick, just standing there in her entryway. Calm, casual, talking to her mom like he'd been invited. He said, I was called, when she asked what he was doing there. Not I was passing by or I'm looking for someone. Just, I was called. Her mom handled it like a pro, honestly. She smiled and said, I think you're mistaken, and asked him to leave. He just nodded, turned, and walked out. No argument, no hesitation. We stood frozen in the hallway. I felt cold all over. Not scared, exactly, just disturbed. That was the last time any of us saw Patrick. He stopped coming to school. Rumors flew around his family moved. He got transferred. He ran away. Whatever. But the weirdest part, when I finally asked a teacher about him, she looked confused. Said she didn't remember any student with that name. Gabby tried to find him online. No profiles, no records, nothing. It was like he'd been erased. Or maybe he was never really there. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't said his name. Or if he hadn't adopted us. I don't know. But every so often, when I'm alone and it's quiet, I feel like someone's watching me. And I think of that moment on the roof, Patrick, holding a bat, staring with those empty eyes. And I wonder if we really were safe. Or if we just haven't been called yet. The shadow in the hallway, it started when I was around 14. My family and I had just moved into a new house. It was a big, old 2-story home on the edge of town, built in the early 1900s. The kind of house that had creaky floorboards, high ceilings, and long hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. On the surface, it seemed like a great place to live, but there was something unsettling about it from the moment we stepped inside. My parents loved it immediately, but I wasn't so sure. The house had an eerie, abandoned feel to it. The air always felt heavy, even when the sun was shining. My bedroom was upstairs, at the very end of a long hallway that had no lights except for the dim ones at either end. It felt like a place that should have been locked up for years, left to decay. Yet it was perfectly livable. I had a window that overlooked the backyard, where a large oak tree stood like a silent sentinel. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. The first week passed without anything too strange happening. I went to school, came home, and went to bed just like any other teenager. But that's when the first odd thing happened. I had always been someone who hated sleeping with the door closed. It felt too claustrophobic. So, my door was usually left ajar a little, just enough for me to feel comfortable. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure why I didn't hear anything or feel particularly scared, but something was off. I sat up in bed, blinking into the darkness, and that's when I noticed it. There was a figure standing in the hallway just outside my room. A shadow, tall and lean, standing perfectly still. At first, I thought it was my dad, but when I squinted, I realized it couldn't be. My dad was much shorter, and this figure seemed unnaturally tall. It had no features, just a dark silhouette against the faint light from the hallway. I stared at it for what felt like forever, too terrified to move or call out. I thought it might have been my imagination, some trick of the light, or maybe even a dream. But then, the figure shifted. It took one slow step forward, its form becoming a little clearer in the dim light. I could see its head now, tilted slightly, as though it was examining me. I felt my heart drop to my stomach. I froze. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person standing there, too still to be human. I felt like I was being watched, analyzed. It was as if the thing in the hallway wasn't sure whether I could see it or not. I didn't move a muscle. Then, in one swift motion, the figure started to move toward me. It didn't walk, it glided, unnaturally fast and smooth. My heart pounded as it came closer, and I suddenly realized I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even blink. The closer it got, the more intense the fear became. It was as though the temperature in the room had dropped, and the air felt thick, like I couldn't breathe. When the figure reached the edge of my bed, it stopped. I could feel the weight of its presence. It didn't touch me or speak, but it was there, standing right next to me. I was shaking, my entire body trembling under the covers. The figure just stood there for what felt like an eternity, and then, without warning, it turned and walked away. I don't remember what happened after that. I must have passed out from fear or shock, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the bright morning sunlight. I convinced myself it had been a dream, a nightmare that I had somehow gotten tangled up in. But then, it happened again. A few nights later, I woke up at the same time, 3 a.m. I had heard something this time. The creak of the floorboards outside my door. The soft shuffle of footsteps. My door was slightly ajar, and I could see the dark hallway stretching out into the night. And there it was again. The same tall shadow, standing motionless in the hallway. This time, I didn't waste any time. I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room, desperate to get away from whatever it was. I pounded on their door, my heart racing. But when they opened it, the hallway was empty. No figure, no shadow, just the faint moonlight filtering through the window. I tried to tell my parents, but they brushed it off. "You're just imagining things," my mom said, trying to comfort me. "It's probably just a shadow from a tree or something." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the fear was real. The feeling that something wasn't right in that house grew every night. I started sleeping with the lights on, but even that didn't help. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel something watching me. I started hearing whispers at night, low, unintelligible murmurs that echoed from somewhere down the hallway. Sometimes, I would hear a door creak open, or footsteps pacing outside my room. As the days went on, things got worse. The figure started to appear more frequently, but it wasn't always in the hallway. Sometimes it would be at the top of the stairs, or standing in the kitchen when I went down for a midnight snack. It wasn't always the same figure, it seemed to change shape, but it always had that same tall, dark silhouette, with no clear features or details. The most terrifying part was that it never seemed to notice me. It never approached me. It just stood there, watching, waiting. But for what? I began to do some research. I searched for any history about the house, but found nothing. The only thing I could find was that the house had once belonged to an older couple who had died in the 1970s. But there were no records of anything sinister. No deaths, no murders. Just an old house, with a long history. But none of that explained what was happening to me. None of it explained the whispers, the footsteps, or the figure that haunted the hallway. One night, I decided to confront it. I couldn't take the fear anymore. I waited until I saw the figure again, standing in the hallway. This time, I didn't freeze. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the stairs, slowly, my hands shaking. I aimed the beam of light at the figure, expecting it to vanish. But it didn't. Instead, the figure turned to face me, slowly, deliberately. It didn't have a face, just a void where one should be. And as it moved toward me, I felt a rush of cold air, like the temperature in the room had dropped to freezing. The floor beneath my feet seemed to groan under its weight, but it didn't make a sound. It just glided, coming closer and closer, until it was right in front of me. And then, I saw a tan image flash through my mind, of an old woman standing in the exact same spot. Her eyes were wide open, and her mouth hung open in an eternal scream. I screamed too. I didn't even know if I was awake or dreaming anymore, but I ran as fast as I could. I ran out of the house barefoot, not stopping until I reached the neighbor's house. They called my parents, and when they came to pick me up, I refused to go back inside. We moved out of that house within the week, and we never spoke of it again. I've never seen that figure again, but every time I'm alone, I remember it, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, somewhere, watching.